They fined me $30,000 for a cabin that wasn't even on their land, and when I proved it, their entire board ended up facing court. Picture this. I'm standing inside my hand-built cedar cabin, morning coffee steaming in the cool mountain air, a stack of legal papers trembling in my hands. The scent of sawdust and pine still clings to my clothes, but all I can smell is trouble. Right there on the counter sits a letter from my Homeowners Association demanding $30,000 for unauthorized construction. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake until I called them and realized they were dead serious. They said my cabin violated HOA rules, except my property sits 847 feet outside their jurisdiction. That's when the real story began, one that exposed hidden corruption, divided an entire neighborhood, and ended with the same people who fined me standing in front of a judge. So grab your coffee, because I'm about to tell you how a simple mountain cabin sparked a fight that changed everything. And before you judge, what would you do if someone tried to fine you for something on your own land? When I first came up to the mountains, I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted quiet. Pine trees instead of traffic lights, the crackle of a wood stove instead of the buzz of city air conditioners. After 30 years running electrical crews, I figured I'd earned the right to hear nothing but wind through the pines. My wife, Melody, and I used to dream about this cabin, about waking up to the smell of cedar and coffee instead of exhaust fumes. When she passed, that dream became the one thing I could still build. The land had been in my family for decades, a rough 40-acre plot beyond the last street sign of Pinecrest Estates. Their manicured lawns stopped at the asphalt. My property began where the forest started taking back its space. No fences, no sidewalks, just dirt, deer tracks, and enough sky to make you feel small again. That first spring, I cleared brush until my hands blistered, ran the sawmill until sunset, and let the whine of blades drown out the quiet left behind after losing Melody. Every plank I cut felt like a heartbeat. I pulled every county permit, structural, electrical, septic. The clerk at the county office even smiled and said, "You're one of the rare ones who still does this by the book." It cost me a few extra dollars, but it meant nobody could ever say the place wasn't legit. By midsummer, the frame stood tall against the ridgeline, golden in the evening light. I remember the smell of fresh sawdust mixing with rain when I hung the final roof panels. It wasn't just a building, it was peace nailed together. I put Melody's old wind chimes on the porch beam. When they rang, it felt like she was telling me to keep going. Then came the Lexus, white, spotless, too clean for mountain dust. It rolled up my dirt road one morning while I was setting window trim. The woman who stepped out looked like she'd wandered off a magazine cover and straight into the wrong zip code. Heels, blazer, clipboard. She smiled like someone about to deliver bad news in a friendly tone. "Mr. Steele," she asked. "I'm Vivian Hartwell, president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association. We need to talk about your structure." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "You mean the cabin?" "This is county land. HOA doesn't reach out here." She looked past me at the cabin like it offended her landscaping instincts. "Our community covenants extend to all adjacent properties within the development area." "Adjacent," I repeated. "That's a creative word for not yours." Vivian's smile never moved, but her eyes did, a flicker of irritation behind polite calm. "I'll have our legal department clarify," she said, turning on those sinking heels and heading back to her car. 2 weeks later, the clarification arrived by certified mail. I still remember the sound of that envelope tearing open, the kind of paper that already smells like trouble. $30,000. Unauthorized structure within community limits. Failure to comply could result in daily penalties or a property lien. I laughed out loud at first. Then I didn't. I called the number listed on the letter, half expecting some clerk to admit it was a clerical error. Instead, I got Vivian herself. "Mrs. Hartwell, there's been a mix-up," I said, trying to stay civil. "My cabin's outside your boundary line." Silence, papers shuffling. "Mr. Steele, our jurisdiction includes all properties that affect Pinecrest Estate's visual and environmental standards." The fine stands, visual standards. I can't even see your neighborhood from here. Our community can see you, Mr. Steele. That's what matters." The line clicked dead. For a minute, I just stood there staring at my phone. The mountains outside my window looked the same, but everything suddenly felt smaller, like invisible walls had crept up around me. I could almost hear Melody's wind chimes outside, soft and uncertain, like she was asking what I was going to do about it. The next week, neighbors started calling. "Garrett, did you really build without HOA approval?" one asked, half whispering. Another said Vivian had mentioned I was refusing compliance. Word travels fast in places where people share fences and gossip instead of firewood. Soon, I could feel eyes on me every time I drove down to the hardware store. That's when the first violation notice appeared on my mailbox back at my old house in town. Improper exterior finish, unapproved color scheme, even though I hadn't changed a thing in 10 years. Vivian was sending a message, "Fight us and we'll bury you in paperwork." I tried reasoning one more time, writing a letter with copies of my county permits and property deed showing clear boundaries. I even highlighted the survey coordinates. A week later, the envelope came back with a sticky note, "Surveyor error. Fine remains." That was the moment something shifted. Grief and patience turned into resolve. I wasn't just building a cabin anymore. I was defending the last piece of my life that still felt mine. Early one morning, I loaded up my truck and drove straight to the Jefferson County Courthouse. The clerk, a gray-haired man with reading glasses low on his nose, helped me pull every map, plat, and incorporation record for Pinecrest Estates. The HOA's boundaries were clearly drawn, signed, and stamped in 2008, 15 years after my uncle's deed. My cabin sat 847 feet beyond the outermost line. I took photos, copies, coordinates, everything. Proof thicker than any HOA binder. I mailed certified copies to Vivian and each board member with a polite letter asking them to withdraw the fine. Her reply came fast and cold. "The board has reviewed your materials. We find inconsistencies in your documentation." Fine stands. No explanation, no courtesy, just a signature that looked like she'd stabbed the page. That's when I realized this wasn't about property lines. It was about power. Vivian needed control, and I'd built something she couldn't touch. That kind of person doesn't admit mistakes. They double down. Within days, new complaints started rolling in. Anonymous tips to county code enforcement. False reports that I was renting the cabin illegally. Even a rumor that I'd threatened a board member. Each one took time to disprove, but that was the point, to wear me down until I gave up. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every phone call, every letter, every conversation with neighbors. I created a binder labeled Evidence, because if Vivian wanted a paperwork war, I was bringing a tank. One night, while going through county records again, I noticed something odd in the HOA filings, an attached vendor list with payments to a company called Pinecrest Property Management LLC. The address looked familiar, too familiar. I typed it into Google Maps. It was Vivian's home address. I sat back, heartbeat thudding. That's when it hit me. This fine wasn't random. It was bait, a way to squeeze money out of anyone too tired or scared to fight back. The next morning, as the sun came up over the ridge, I poured a cup of coffee, looked out over my cabin's porch, and decided I wasn't backing down. If they wanted a war over a fake fine, I'd give them something real to worry about. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, a mix that somehow made you trust what you found there. I spent hours hunched over faded maps and typed out incorporation papers until the fluorescent lights began to hum. Every record told the same story. Pinecrest Estates ended at Granite Ridge Road, and my uncle's parcel began hundreds of feet beyond it. I wasn't just outside their reach. Legally, they couldn't touch me. When I walked out into the sunlight, the folder under my arm felt heavier than concrete. That night I called a man named Rex Morrison, a county-recommended surveyor who'd been settling property disputes since before most of the HOA board had mortgages. The next morning, he showed up in a dusty pickup with a transit scope that looked like it had seen a few battles. "Let's see how wrong they are," he said, and started marking points. 3 hours later, he handed me the numbers, 847 feet outside their jurisdiction, exactly as I'd claimed. Rex grinned. She's bluffing, son. They always bluff. I sent the new survey by certified mail to every board member and waited. 2 days later, another letter arrived. Surveyor error. Fine stands. It was like arguing with a wall that answered in legal stationery. That's when the whisper campaign started. I'd walk into the local grocery store, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. Neighbors I'd helped fix porch lights suddenly looked through me. Someone told folks I'd built the cabin without septic permits. Another claimed I was storing fuel illegally. Vivian had turned gossip into a weapon. I could have packed up and ignored it, but something deeper kicked in. 30 years of union work where you learn to stand up when someone tries to push you. I started knocking on doors. Martha Henderson, fined for planting the wrong flowers. Bob Schmidt, charged for painting his fence unapproved beige. Jennifer Walsh, threatened for running a small bookkeeping business from her spare room. Different stories, same signature at the bottom of each letter, Vivian Hartwell. That's when Josephine Carter entered the picture. 78, sharp eyes behind reading glasses, and a handshake that meant business. Her late husband, Harold, had been the HOA treasurer for over a decade before a stroke forced him to step down. When I mentioned the suspicious management company, she frowned. Harold said something about missing receipts before he got sick. I still have his files in the garage. We spent that afternoon digging through boxes labeled by year. Old check registers, bank statements, minutes from board meetings typed on yellow paper. The deeper we looked, the uglier it got. Payments to maintenance vendors that didn't exist. Checks written to Pinecrest Property Management with no invoices attached. Even reimbursements to board members for administrative hours. It wasn't an HOA anymore. It was a personal bank account with bylaws. That night we gathered a handful of fed-up homeowners at Josephine's kitchen table. The smell of strong coffee mixed with printer ink as I spread documents across the wood surface. She fined me for a cabin outside her borders, I said, but look at this, $47,000 in unaccounted expenses over 3 years. Martha gasped. Bob muttered something under his breath that I won't repeat. Josephine just nodded slowly. It's theft, she said. Plain and simple. We made a plan. Rex would prepare a public copy of the survey map. Josephine and I would compile financial records into a presentation anyone could understand. Jennifer offered to canvass the neighborhood and gather every violation letter people still had. The goal wasn't revenge, it was daylight. Bullies hate daylight. A week later, Vivian delivered her own surprise. A glossy invitation slid under every door, announcing an emergency community meeting to address rogue member misconduct. The rogue member was me. Thursday night, 7 p.m., Community Hall. Perfect. We circled the date on Josephine's calendar like it was Judgment Day. When that Thursday came, the weather matched the mood. Low clouds, air heavy with the promise of rain. The parking lot overflowed with cars. Inside, folding chairs lined up in neat rows. And at the front stood Vivian behind a lectern, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She smiled for the crowd, the same practiced expression that had probably sold 1,000 lies. We're here to discuss disruptive actions by certain residents, she began, eyes locking on me. I waited until she finished her opening speech, then stood up and carried a rolled-up survey map to the front. Before we talk about disruption, I said, can you point on this map where your jurisdiction ends? Murmurs spread. I unrolled the chart across the table, red boundary lines, coordinates, everything stamped by the county. According to official records, Pinecrest stops here. My cabin is here, I tapped the paper. 847 feet beyond, Vivian's jaw tightened. Property boundaries are subject to interpretation, she said. Not to satellites, they're not, Rex called from the back, holding up the county-verified report. The crowd turned. Phones came out recording. Then Josephine rose slowly, holding a thick folder. Since we're clarifying things, she said, these are bank records my husband kept when he was treasurer. They show payments to a company that lists your home address, Mrs. Hartwell. Gasps rippled across the room. Vivian reached for the microphone, but Josephine's voice cut through the noise like a bell. This community trusted you, and you used that trust to steal from us. The room erupted. Questions, accusations, disbelief. Someone shouted about the missing playground fund. Another demanded refunds for bogus fines. Vivian's composure cracked. You don't understand the complexity of managing property values. She snapped, the calm tone gone. Everything I did was to protect this neighborhood. Bob Schmidt stood and held up his violation letters. You fined me $1,500 for a satellite dish. Was that protecting property value or paying for your lawyer? The shouting grew louder until a board member finally stepped away from Vivian's side and said quietly into the mic, I think we should call for an independent audit. The crowd cheered. Vivian's face drained of color. She grabbed her briefcase and stormed out, papers fluttering behind her like feathers from a broken pillow. When the doors closed behind her, the noise turned to a buzz of adrenaline and disbelief. People clustered around Josephine's table, snapping photos of documents, trading stories they'd been too scared to tell before. The mood shifted from anger to resolve. We weren't victims anymore. We were witnesses. That night, long after everyone left, Josephine poured the last of the coffee into a mug and handed it to me. You started this by building something honest, she said. Now let's finish it the same way. I looked at the stack of evidence on her table, maps, bank statements, letters, and realized the battle had moved far beyond a single cabin. This was about every homeowner who'd ever been pushed around by people hiding behind paperwork. Vivian wanted control. What she was about to get was accountability. Outside, rain finally started falling, tapping against the windows like a slow applause. I stood there listening to it, feeling that old stubborn calm settle in my chest. Tomorrow we'd file complaints with the county and the state. Tomorrow the fight would get real. But for the first time since this all began, I knew we weren't fighting alone. By sunrise, the evidence box sat on my passenger seat like a co-pilot. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, with Josephine riding shotgun, her folders clutched in both hands. Inside, we met a detective named Martinez, who listened without interrupting while we laid everything on the table. When we finished, he tapped the pile of bank statements and said, "You folks did half my job already." He promised to forward everything to the district attorney and start interviews that week. It felt strange walking out of there. For months, I'd been on defense. Now the story was finally running in the right direction. The next few days moved fast. The sheriff's deputies questioned board members, and auditors arrived to comb through HOA accounts. Rex helped them verify the survey maps. Vivian tried to rally her supporters, sending long emails about false accusations and personal vendettas. But this time, nobody believed her. The neighbors she'd intimidated were forwarding every message straight to the investigators. Within a week, the HOA bank accounts were frozen pending review. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Martinez's voice crackled through the phone. "We executed a search warrant this morning. You'll want to watch the news." That evening, Channel 7 led with the headline, "HOA President Arrested for Fraud and Embezzlement." The footage showed Vivian in the same immaculate blazer she'd worn at every meeting, walking handcuffed to a patrol car, trying to hide her face behind a stack of papers. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled, like a weight had finally slid off my shoulders. But the story didn't end there. Investigators traced her fake management company to 3 other neighborhoods, each with its own pattern of inflated fees and mysterious maintenance costs. The total theft topped $2 million across multiple HOAs. Federal agents joined the case. For the first time in years, homeowners who'd been scared to open their mail were standing shoulder to shoulder, comparing notes, realizing they weren't crazy after all. A month later, we gathered again in the community hall, this time under new leadership. The meeting opened with Deputy Martinez standing by the door and the county attorney at the podium. They announced that restitution funds would be distributed once the court finalized the case. People actually applauded. I sat near the back beside Josephine and Rex, while neighbors, once strangers, started talking like a community again. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I never wanted a fight, I told them. All I wanted was to build a place where life could be quiet. But if you let fear keep you silent, folks like her keep winning. I'm proud we didn't stay quiet. The room stayed silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause that felt like thunder rolling through the rafters. Vivian eventually pled guilty to fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. She got 4 years in federal prison and was ordered to repay what she'd taken. The news cycle called it the Pinecrest scandal. Reporters wanted interviews, but I kept most of them short. The real heroes were the neighbors who found their courage. Over the following months, the new board turned transparency from a promise into a policy. Monthly reports posted online, open-door meetings, every expense public. The playground that had existed only on budget sheets was finally built. On the opening day, the sound of kids laughing echoed through the same streets where people used to whisper about fines and violations. They named it the Harold Carter Memorial Playground in honor of Josephine's husband. She cried when she saw the plaque. As for me, I finished the cabin exactly how I'd planned. The porch rails gleam with 2 coats of varnish, and the chimes ring whenever a breeze slips through the pines. I turned my experience into something useful, started a small outfit with Rex called Boundary Solutions, helping other homeowners deal with property disputes and crooked boards. Word spread faster than we expected. Turns out, there are a lot of people out there who just need someone to remind them they're not powerless. Sometimes, when the sun drops behind the ridge and the sky turns the color of copper, I sit on the porch and listen to those chimes. The air smells like pine and fresh coffee, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet doesn't feel empty. I keep a framed letter on the wall inside, an official notice from the new HOA board voiding the $30,000 fine, stamped and signed with an apology. It's a reminder that even the biggest walls of bureaucracy can crack if you keep pushing. Melody's photo rests on the mantel, smiling at the cabin she never got to see finished. I'd like to think she'd laugh at how far this little project went, how it ended up changing laws and lives instead of just one man's retirement. The state even passed new legislation requiring financial transparency for every HOA in Colorado. Reporters called it the Pinecrest Reform Act. But to me, it's just proof that standing up matters. Every so often a new homeowner stops by, usually someone who's heard the story online. They always ask the same thing. Was it worth it? I tell them yes, not because of the headlines or the settlement, but because the sound of kids playing down at Harold Carter Playground means we did something right. So if you ever find yourself staring at a letter that tries to scare you out of what's yours, don't fold. Document everything. Ask questions. Find your neighbors. Bullies count on silence, but silence ends the moment someone speaks up. The cabin taught me that. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the steady creak of wood cooling at dusk, the smell of cedar, and the quiet certainty that you fought the right fight and finally came home.